Almost 9 out of 10 of us hold quote-unquote fundamental biases against women, according to a new UN report decrying a quote-unquote decade of stagnation. It's led to a dismantling of women's rights in many parts of the world. Now, the United Nations Development Program report released Monday found that half of people globally still believe that men make better political leaders than women. More than 40% believe men make better business executives than women. And this one really shocked us around here. 25% believing it's justified for a man to beat his wife. Now, these biases were shown across regions of income levels, development, and cultures. In other words, a variety of people's polled there. But we're joined now by Tasneem Mirza, economic specialist at the Human Development Report Office of the United Nations Development Program in New York. Early hour there, so really appreciate your time joining us on the program. Look, first it was...
Thank you so much. Very happy to be here.
No, great to come to the source of this. I mean, it was shocking for us, a lot of the findings in this report, as I know, it's meant to be, and it was shocking. What surprised you the most, getting into the real details?
That is exactly what you had said, which is 9 out of 10 people are biased. These numbers are shocking, and they're persistent across the globe. If you look at high Human Development Index countries versus low Human Development Index countries, you see, in fact, those biases are prevalent everywhere. Even in the countries that have the least bias, and these are typically high-income countries, at least a quarter of the population shows some sort of a bias against women. So these are very stark numbers. Yeah. And the interesting thing I also found is that these biases are not men having bias against women. It's also women having bias against women. So when we disaggregate the data and look across men and women's biases, they're quite similar. And so it makes us think that these are deeply embedded, and oftentimes they're coming to people's life very early in childhood based on what they're exposed to, the information they receive in school, what they see in their homes, from communities, from religious institutions. These influence people's biases and stereotypes, and they kind of linger. They stay along people's life throughout the course of their life.
Yeah, like deep, embedded, institutionalized in some cases stigmas here. Look, given these sharp and shocking findings, it was really unsettling, reading the details of this. Give us just an idea of what goes into, this level of a study. How is the world surveyed, by your UN office? It's just in brief, obviously. How big of a project was this?
So the data actually comes from the World Values Survey, and that institution has been collecting this data for decades. We use the data and collect it to compile an index called the Gender Social Norms Index. And the GSNI is computed for 80 countries, covering 85% of the global population, to give a picture of what the biases look like across the world. So our analysis is to kind of shed light as to how these biases differ across regions, across gender, where they're coming in, and what policies should governments be looking at to tackle some of these biases.
I mean, that does seem to be the big, question in terms of, how can it all be improved? What can be done here? Is it on the governments? Where does change come from in this issue?
In the fight for gender equality, we have come a long way. We have, decades back, women couldn't vote, for example, or there was a culture of sending boys to school, but now that norm has shifted. So in a way, we have come very far. And a lot of that work has come from implementation of policies, for example, mandatory schooling for boys and girls. It has come from strong institutions that have fought for gender equality. So the report suggests that it's very important to continue building those gender-sensitive institutions and continue to strengthen on policies. But it's also important to look at the social context. The social context influences gender biases that are inherent in people. These come from people's beliefs, their values. And so understanding that social context will then influence. First, it's important for us to understand that we have a bias and acknowledge that we have a bias. And then we can move towards fighting it. One example is education. Education could play a key role. Education helps build critical reasoning and thinking, and it can have an influence on understanding, in strengthening our beliefs and values, and then tackling some of these gender biases that we might have.
You mentioned this here, the importance of simply calling out the bias, revealing, that this bias is a real thing. And I know the gender equality fight, as it's titled, is a key thing. There are these benchmarks set. I think 2030 was supposed to be one of these, goal years to reach gender equality. Does this essentially all the bias revealed right now, does it look unrealistic to meet those goals? Are we talking about a long-term process?
That's right. In fact, not only our study, but numerous other studies are saying that it will be difficult to achieve the goals, the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, given the pace at which progress is happening. It might take decades, in fact, to reach those goals. In our study, we are highlighting, for example, only 10% of the heads of state and heads of government globally are women. And that number has been like that for decades, or since we've collected data on it. And so if you're not unable to have an impact on women's power, women's voice, their role in societies, then in fact, everybody loses out. It's not only women who are affected, it's not only their freedom and agency that's affected, but societies as a whole, they are losing out on it.
And again, just a minute we have left this, but the startling fact is, again, what you found is this is a worldwide phenomenon. This transcends all the different, cultural inequalities, income inequalities. There's something entrenched in humankind over this issue.
Absolutely. This is a surprising finding of the report, that when we look across different categories of countries, that in fact it's prevalent everywhere, even if many of the developed countries have come so far in terms of their fight on gender equality. But when we ask these questions about people's beliefs and their values, we ask them, do you think men make better political leaders than women? Or if we ask, do you think men make better business executives than women? We are seeing that number is almost half of the world, right? So those numbers are really stark, and it shows that this needs to happen across the globe, across all countries. We
appreciate your efforts for bringing this up. Sorry to cut out any Tasneem. Running up on a break here. Live television, Tasneem Mirza coming to us from New York. An important role you played on this report for the United Nations. So thanks for joining us on the program on it.